I'm Jason Ānanda Josephson, and this is the third in a series of lectures about the concept of religion. Again, leave your comments under Reddit, where you can find me under my username darknessvisible7, and don't leave any comments here on YouTube. Sorry for the gap between these videos. I'm going to try and make them come more quickly. I've been slacking off, but I'm going to get you more videos and lectures on the concept of religion in the near future. Today, what I'm going to give you is an example of the non-appearance of religion, a source that you would think religion would appear in, and why it doesn't appear there. And doing that will let me illustrate the medieval conceptual schema that ultimately gave way for the modern concept of religion to be produced. One day in 1556, the Portuguese Dominican friar Gaspar da Cruz was exploring the Chinese city of Cantao when he found himself on a small islet in the midst of a broad river. There, da Cruz was surprised to see what he took to be, quote, a kind of monastery, unquote. And then, when he approached it, he found inside something even more striking, what looked like an image of a woman with child. He was amazed because he imagined that it might be a representation of the Virgin Mary, and therefore evidence that all of China was in fact Christian, or had at one time been Christianized. So he went out and he asked various lay people and another group, the people in the monastery, a group he referred to as, quote, the priests of the idols, unquote, in Portuguese, sacerdotes dos ídolos, and he asked them about the icon's meaning. But the answers he got were pretty unsatisfactory. They didn't know who the Virgin Mary was. They didn't understand what da Cruz was talking about. And this caused him to think that if the image had originally depicted the Virgin Mary, its true meaning had been lost. In other words, the Chinese were not Christians. Moreover, this caused Cruz to conclude that the Chinese had no religion and, quote, have no knowledge whatever of God, end quote. This is striking. In effect, da Cruz is trying to make the case in the middle of a monastery in China that the Chinese have no religion. This should sound bizarre for a couple of reasons. First, because today we would describe medieval China as full of religions, not the least Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism. And second, because da Cruz is describing a monastery and priests. So it sounds like he is giving evidence for religion in the very minute he is denying that there is any religion in China. So today's lecture is going to make sense of this seeming conceptual disjuncture. To recap where we left off, or for those of you who didn't see the first two videos, you may have been curious where the modern term for religion comes from. In short, the words for religion in most contemporary European languages have their origin in the Latin word religio. Religio first meant a kind of scruple or obligation, not necessarily connected to the gods. But this isn't our modern religion. So a pre-Christian Roman centurion, or what have you, would have been baffled to hear the word religion in the plural, to hear about things like the religions of Christianity and Judaism, etc. So in brief, despite its appearance in Latin sources, religio doesn't mean the same thing as our modern religion. In the European Middle Ages, the term religio and its vernacular derivatives occur very infrequently. And when they do so, again, it doesn't mean religion in the modern sense. Let me give you a typical late example from an 1528 dialogue titled, "Read me and be not wroth, for I say no thing but troth." Put in modern English, this would be, read me and don't be mad, because I'm saying nothing but the truth. This was obviously before our modern spelling. Okay, anyway, in that dialogue, one of the characters asks, "Were thou never in religion?" And the other character, named Iefre, replies, "Yes, so God help me, 12 years continually." Were you ever in religion 12 years continually? What does this mean? That he was religious for 12 years? No. It means that Iefre was a monk in a monastery for 12 years. The standard European usage of the term religio, and even the early English religion in the Middle Ages, was in reference to the performance of ritual obligations. especially to describe a life bounded by monastic vows. Similarly, in the same period, the noun the religious referred to monks and nuns. Again, this usage is fairly consistent with the classical Latin precedents, and it has even been preserved to some extent in modern English. For example, when people say they do things religiously, like when I say, I practice my bass guitar religiously. True example, although actually only in the summer, because I don't really play it at all during the academic year. Anyway, okay. If I said I play my bass religiously, what I mean is that I am playing my bass scrupulously. So again, in at least the 16th century source I've just given you, a recognizably modern concept of religion hasn't yet made its appearance, despite the word religio. Wilfred Cantwell Smith, a scholar I mentioned in the last lecture, argues that religio entered the mainstream of European vocabulary as part of the Protestant Reformation. But even then, at that time, it was basically synonymous with piety. There were not different kinds of religio in this account, but more or less genuine expressions of religio. To make this point, Smith retranslates the titles of two famous Protestant texts, Zwingli's De Vera et Falsa Religione Commentarius and John Calvin's Christianae Religionis Institutio. He translates them not as commentary on true and false religion or institutes of Christian religion as they're usually translated, but instead as, quote, an essay on genuine and spurious piety and, quote, grounding in Christian piety. Why does he do this? Basically because both Zwingli and Calvin thought that religio was common to all humanity. People were pious or divinely directed everywhere and in various degrees. They were more or less piousness, and their piousness could be focused on the wrong kind of object, but there were different religions. Hence the use of religion by scholars to describe this pre-modern West, much less anywhere else in the world, runs the risk of the cardinal sin of the historian, that of anachronism. So those of you following this far are probably wondering, what about other religions? There's a particular conceptual schema in place here that I want to describe in a little bit of detail. The late medieval Europeans often described only one religion, Christianity. In broad brushstrokes, what we now call Judaism was understood as a mere preparation for the coming of Christ, and in that sense not a separate religion, so much as a vestigial remnant of something that had already been superseded. When Jews resisted giving way to Christian truth, they were described as participating in a diabolical heresy, by and large. By calling it a heresy, they meant that it was a pseudo-Christianity, not a different religion. Islam, also often called Mohammedanism later, or just the Turk or the Moor, was originally thought of as a form of idolatry, a term we'll get to in more detail in a minute. But when Christians realized that Islam had its own aniconic discourse, when they realized that Islam also attacked idols, they started describing it as a Christian heresy. If you want examples, you could think of Petrus Alfonsi's Dialogi contra Iudios, in the little reference, that a bar that I'm imagining is appearing right here, from 1110. So if heresy is one way to describe the defective branches of the one true Christianity as they understood it, then there's another term that's really clear and in place, or another set of terms, idolatry and this word pagan. So idolatry had a long history in Christian theology and apologetics. In Paul's epistle to the Romans, in Romans 1:22 through 7, for example, the depiction of deities in the form of images of mortal human beings or animals was described as a mortal sin that evoked the wrath of God. As punishment, God cursed idolaters with the quote-unquote unnatural homosexual lusts. In other words, sodomy was considered to be divine punishment for the more fundamental sin of idolatry. If this were not already damning enough, in the 16th century, the rise of the Decalogue over and against the seven sins as the center for Christian ethics gave primary importance to idolatry as the main commandment or sin in Christianity. In the Augustinian version of the Ten Commandments, the first commandment was read as Exodus 20 through 2 through 6. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sins of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. So the hierarchy of the Ten Commandments made idolatry the number one sin. It was a Christian's primary offense against God. Murder, after all, only comes in at number 5, and in the time the list, the hierarchy was important. So this shift in the importance of idolatry also changed the way Christians understood the figure of the devil, from thinking of him as an antichrist, seducing men into hating his fellows, into something that they called the ape of God, the simia Dei, or divine antitype. And as such, they claimed that the devil made false worship. Hence, parallels between Christianity and idolatry were the sign that the devil had imitated faith in the distribution of counter-Christianities all over the globe. It also meant that it was a divine commandment to smash these diabolical works. The first commandment was also often read in conjunction with Psalm 96:5. Creonium omnis dii gentium daimonia. For all the gods of the Gentiles, of the pagans, are devils. This juxtaposition allowed the facile identification between pagans or Gentiles, those terms are the same basically, and idolatry. Identifications in the work of people like Justin Martyr, who argued that paganism was the product of a diabolically inspired misrecognition. Reaffirmed in the writings of people like Isidore of Seville. According to Isidore, pagan idols were literally inhabited by demons that under the guidance of the devil used their dark powers to turn people away from the true faith. In this account, idolatry is a demonic perversion, or we might say a fake religion, or a diabolical mockery of religion, but it is not a religion itself. The schema that I'm imagining here, there's this old schema. We have religion equal to Christianity, and then there's a false imitation, not religion, that's called idolatry, which is understood as diabolical and euhemeristic. And then this Christianity, this one true religion, also has two other false variants or heresies. Well, a lot of them, but two of them are particularly important, Judaism and then Islam. So kind of you get a true religion, Christianity, the false religions of Judaism and Islam, and then everything else, which is kind of paganism or diabolical idolatry. I'm not sure if gesturing in the air is really going to help you guys, but hopefully I'll add some texts up here. So what caused this conceptual schema? We have one religion and a vast pseudo-fake religion of paganisms to change. Well, in some ways, it began to change over the course of the Protestant Reformation, when Europe was splintered into Protestant and Catholic regions, particularly after the Peace of Augsburg, and in the account of some Europeans, into Catholic and Protestant religions. According to the phrase, chaos regio, eos religio, to each region its religion, or to each, But again, we should think of Protestants and Catholics as claiming that there was one authentic form of Christian piety, which they called the Christian religion. And in general, they regarded the other one as false or imitation religion. So it's not that different, even though they start to talk about different religions, but you start to use the term religion to describe Protestant and Catholic groups in a new way. So that leaves us with another question. How did this political settlement between Protestants and Catholics become globalized into an anthropological category? In other words, how did the undifferentiated idolatry of the so-called pagan world turn into our modern list of religions? Tune in to the next Reddit lecture to find out. And as always, thanks for listening. Sorry for the delay. Hope you like the hallway.